Today we're going to discuss the Song Dynasty. As the Tang government collapsed in the south, the Song Dynasty rose in the north. Early Song rulers focused on ending the chaos that followed the fall of the Tang. Emperor Tezu saw unification as the most pressing need and subdued many competing factions and peoples. The only group he could not defeat was Liao Dynasty, which had been created by the nomadic Khitan people and posed a constant threat to the Song. The Song dynasty was more centralized than the Tang, with a government organized more strictly along bureaucratic lines in both military and financial affairs. The early Song era was a golden age of good government, prosperity, and creativity. The Song alone, among the major Chinese dynasties, never entered upon an expansionist phase. They didn't want to grow. Song military weakness had often been related to the dynasty's emphasis upon civilian control and centralization of military authority in the capital at the expense of the autonomous military commands in the border regions. In reality, the Song military machine was quite formidable, perhaps the most powerful in the world at the time, with some 1 million men under arms and in possession of that era's most advanced weapons. The Song's inability to expand its empire came largely because it faced an unrelenting succession of vigorous and determined Central Asian mounted armies that were able to quickly grasp and counter Song military techniques. The Song re-established central control in several ways. The government introduced irrigation and land reclamation efforts. But because the land was still mostly consolidated in the hands of a few nobles and landlords, the peasants did not benefit much from the agricultural recovery that ensued. The early Song capital was established at Kaifeng, a major commercial and manufacturing center served by the Grand Canal. The prosperity and growing trade of the Song dynasty resulted in population growth, as China during this era reached more than 100 million people, with an increasing number living in the developing cities. During the course of the Song dynasty, cities grew to accommodate the rising population. The cities became crowded. The government was attentive to the needs of the people and worked to keep them as safe and comfortable as possible by managing the water supply, dealing with waste, working to prevent fires, and building restaurants, shops, theaters, and parks. The Song dynasty's civil government was based on Confucian principles and looked to consolidate the emperor's power and limit that of the regional elites and the military. The early Song also eliminated the power of the eunuchs and the great landed families in order to avoid conflicts like the ones that had occurred at the end of the Tang dynasty. The government rebuilt the core of the administration around the scholar gentry, those who participated in the examination system, rather than the eunuchs. The civil servants who came to government through the examination system had no power base of their own. Therefore, they had to rely on the government for their positions and opportunities. Their loyalty to the government meant that they could serve to check the power of the elites. The emperor attempted to provide more of a sense of stability and control by appointing a civil administrator, like a magistrate, and a military official in each region. In addition, the emperor appointed a number of other officials, such as tax collectors, imperial censors, and inspectors. The other officials who had overlapping jurisdiction so that they could check each other's powers. The end result was the creation of a very efficient government system. During this time period, the government expanded the civil service exams, recruiting for its highest positions an educated group who had to pass 3 levels of exams. While in theory the system was open to anyone, in reality it usually drew from the upper classes, because only they could afford the education needed to pass the exams. More men passed the test than ever before. However, the bureaucracy expanded, offering more and better paid positions. To ensure anonymity, students were identified by numbers rather than names, and scribes copied down students' answers. The civil service exam had 3 levels. About 10% of the students who took the exam passed the first level and went on to the capital to sit for the second level. Passing the first level meant that a person could now be considered a member of the gentry. After the second round of tests, another 10% passed and went to the palace to take a third round of tests. Many students would attempt a test several times in an effort to secure an imperial position. Passing the test could radically improve one's social position, but failure could bankrupt a family and result in social ruin. Once in office, officials were regularly evaluated on their job performance. Good performance reviews made one eligible for promotions within the system. Poor evaluations meant a person would get passed over for other opportunities. Although instances of positions being sold or elites recommending people for jobs still occurred, the government worked hard to make certain that higher level positions in the government were filled by people who had passed through the examination system and who had demonstrated competence in their jobs. The Song's centralized government allowed China to expand its economic ventures and invest in many different industries. Government policies and investments, along with technological improvements and innovations, helped spark an economic recovery. As the Song economy grew, commercial interests and merchants rose to a prominent position in society. Towns and cities grew and offered more economic opportunities to the people, and trade with foreign countries also increased. The government, determined to exercise greater control of China's resources, began to crack down on tax evasion by large rural estates. A finance minister helped collect taxes from these estates and monitor government expenditures. At its height, the Song Dynasty maintained a surplus and for a while took in 3 times what the Tang had. Under the Song, gold, silver, copper, iron ore, tin, lead, and coal were mined and used on a large scale. In the 11th century, China probably produced more iron and metal goods than Europe did until the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the mid 18th century. So China was extremely productive under the Song. Shipbuilding flourished, and innovations such as human-powered paddle wheels were introduced. The government also became involved in the economic development of the country and hired people to work in a number of industries, including smelting works where you melt metal down, cotton mills, and armories. China allowed states like Korea to become tributary states rather than trying to fully conquer them. This prevented the drain of resources that would have inevitably accompanied military conquest and administration. Trade continued to expand as China produced metal goods, tea, silk, salt, rice, and other goods. Chinese farmers made use of new crops like fast ripening rice from Vietnam. New crops and other agricultural improvements, such as harnessing oxen and buffalo, heavy iron plows, and things like that, well, they increased the food supply, which in turn caused an increase in population. More food, more people. By 1200, China had about 115 million people. The idea of credit had already been used during the Tang Dynasty as a practical element of facilitating a long distance trade, but it became more fully developed under the Song. So, a system of credit, you don't want to carry all your money with you to a strange new place. You would have a piece of paper stamped by a bank that shows you're good for the money. You could see the picture here. The earliest extent of paper money was printed on wood blocks you could carry. When Zhenzong became emperor in 998, he saw a need to issue paper money in various forms. The government flooded the market with paper currency, resulting in an inflation which caused the money to lose much of its value. Remember, value is determined by scarcity. More money, the less valuable that money is. In addition to government issued money, the Chinese also used a type of currency called flying cash. Certificates accepted as guarantees for hard currency that could be collected through the established credit networks. Flying cash allowed merchants to deposit money or wares in one location and withdraw the equivalent at a different location. This decreased the chances of getting robbed of large sums while traveling. Financially, the Song began to experience problems. Inflation forced the government to look for new sources of revenue by increasing taxes, selling monopolies, and providing incentives to merchants. The population probably doubled during this time, but tax revenues did not keep up. Old patterns of elites and landowners evading taxes resurfaced, leaving a greater burden on the peasants. Expenditures, especially for defense in the north, increased. The military took up to 80% of the government's budget. In addition, the Song government paid them substantial subsidies of silk and silver in an effort to keep northern threats like the Khitan and the Jiji at bay, a further drain on the weakened economy. Chief Counselor Wang Anshi tried to revise government policies, especially financial ones, in an effort to stabilize the empire. Heavy tax burdens and tribute demanded of them by groups like the Khitan and the Western Jie pushed many peasants deeper into poverty. To further complicate things, a famine in 1023 led to hunger riots. Wang Anshi wanted to address these domestic problems to ensure that the country would be strong enough to resist external attacks. He introduced reforms directed specifically against the large landholders and merchants in an effort to improve the position of the poor, craftsmen, petty traders, and small landowners. Laws were enacted to organize the army, equipped it with new weapons, and strengthen the defenses of the country. Wang Anshi hoped to increase China's military capability by requiring regions to provide quotas of trained militia. He also pushed to raise the quality of troops by providing more training and better supplies. Cavalry troops had struggled because they had lost control over chief breeding areas in the north and the northwest to nomads. The government sought to buy up horses for distribution to peasant families in the north, with the understanding that a member of each family should be available if needed for the imperial cavalry. The government also enacted civil reforms, beginning by aiming to increase the pool of candidates who could hold official positions. One reform expanded the number of governmental educational facilities open to those who otherwise would be excluded from the examination system because they could not afford the cost of attending a private school. Wang Anshi also wanted to alter the imperial examinations so they could include practical problems that focused on administration abilities and aptitude, rather than just testing applicants on their ability to memorize classic texts. That is our lecture on the song. There's one more on the song, which will conclude our China unit.